Ohayo gozaimasu. Good morning. This is the second lecture on prosody. Today, let's talk about how to read verse aloud. Because if we can't say the line of verse aloud, if we can't pronounce poetry, so to speak, then we won't understand prosody. So the ability to speak verse aloud is going to be basic. I have my own ideas about this, and you might not even agree with me, but I have a couple of ideas. I'd like to talk about 3 wrong ways to speak verse aloud. The first wrong way is to read it as though it were prose. In other words, don't care at all about the prosody. So let's say, "O rose, thou art sick, the invisible worm that flies in the night of the howling storm has found out thy bed of crimson joy, and his dark secret love doth thy life destroy." You're just kind of rushing through the poem, and you're not really observing anything. You're not doing anything with the prosody, so to speak. Second wrong way is to overemphasize the meter. So we might say, "Tiger, tiger, burning bright in the forest of the night." We're bringing the meter out, certainly. So we're not making the first mistake, but it doesn't sound very good. You don't have to emphasize the meter to speak verse correctly. And you shouldn't, in my opinion. The third wrong way of doing it, in my opinion, is to emote. And actors will do this when they have to read a poem. They're getting to the character of the poem and they're really emoting. It's fine if you're an actor and you might even want to play around with it a little bit, but it's not essential. You don't have to emote, so you don't have to put the poem over as sort of a dramatic monologue. You can if you want, but it's not going to be the main focus. I won't demonstrate. So there's 3 wrong ways of speaking verse aloud. So what's the right way? The right way is to speak thinking about the rhythm of the verse but not overemphasizing it, and to let the poem speak through you, to let the words speak through you, and to respond to the weight of the syllables, the emphasis that the syllables have. So that would be the correct way of reading it. And later on, when we get to particular kinds of poetry, I'll be demonstrating what I think is the correct way of reading a poem aloud. And of course, you might not like the way I read. You might have a better way of reading than I do. That's fine. You feel free to disagree with me. I'm just a guy. So don't worry about it. So the second issue in reading poetry aloud is what to do.
One moment. Sorry.
Sorry, my Siri thought I was speaking to it on my phone. What do you do at the end of a line when there's no punctuation? In prosody, we call this enjambment. There's 2 wrong ways of dealing with enjambment, and one way that for me is satisfactory, the right way of doing it. The first wrong way is to treat every line as a separate unit, stop for a long time at the end of every line, lower your voice, and then start again with the next line. To me, this is wrong. In other words, there's an end of a line, you don't have to stop. And it makes a very awkward effect. There's awkward pauses. Like in my own speech, there are many awkward pauses, but you don't need that extra pause. And I hear people doing this all the time. They just say a line, stop for a while, go on to the next line. The second wrong way of doing it is to just ignore it. Ignore the end of the line. Just go forward. With no pause at all, right? So you're just treating basically the end of a line as a visual thing and not something that's actually part of the prosody of the poem itself, right? So let's try to demonstrate the wrong way and the two wrong ways first. Let's use the prologue to Henry V by Shakespeare. The first wrong way, let's just stop at the end of every line and see what happens. Oh, for a muse of fire that would inspire the greatest heaven of invention, kingdom to stage, princes to act, and monarchs to behold the swelling scene. Okay, it's slow. It's not horrible, but it's slow, a bit boring. Now let's just run roughshod over the end of lines. Oh, for a muse of fire that would inspire the greatest heaven of invention, a kingdom for stage, princes to act, and monarchs to behold the swelling scene. So it's not bad either, but maybe it's not great either. So what's the right way of doing it? I think if you think about what I've defined as the two wrong ways of doing it, then you'll intuitively know what the one right way is to do it, which is to use the end of the line. Make it dynamic. And jamming is one of the things that gives verse its dynamism, right? So you can pause a little bit, you can mark it in some way without just making it kind of a dull pause, right? So there's two wrong ways of dealing with enjambment, one right way. Let's see if I can demonstrate the right way. To think of a poem first, what poem I'm going to use. The poems I'm going to use in these videos are here. I don't read off a written text. Later on, I'll explain why memorization is important. But for now, let's talk about the right way. Let's use another speech from Henry V. And let's try to use the line endings dynamically. Now entertain conjecture of a time when creeping murmur in the pouring dark fills the wide vessel of the universe. From camp to camp, through the foul womb of night, the hum of either army stilly sounds. Could you tell where the lines ended? Did you tell what I was trying to do there? To me, that's the best way of observing enjambment at the end of a line of poetry. Later on, we'll get to the issue of enjambment in modern poetry, which is very abrupt. It's enjamming between the article and the noun, say. That raises some other issues, but my approach to that is still going to be basically dynamic. So to review today's lecture, we have 3 wrong ways of reading verse, reading it as prose, overemphasizing the meter, and emoting. We have 2 wrong ways of observing enjambment. And we have my approach to speaking verse aloud, which is to pay attention to the meter without overemphasizing it, and pay attention to the line endings without overemphasizing those.